So I wanted to go into a bit of detail on this video about the region of the deep hip that in the internal arts in China is called the Qua. I'm pretty sure the word just translates to roughly groin, but in those arts it has a very particular inference. It refers to a very particular action, a very particular part of our anatomy. So if we consider the leg joint to the torso by the hip here, and you imagine or feel this crease in the groin that separates the leg from the torso. You know, this crease folds over like this, it like sinks down and in as I lift the leg and so on and so forth. So the qua is really the inside of that crease. If we consider our leg and hip complex to be something like those action figures from the 80s, if you guys are about as old as I am, or give or take, you might remember having those action figures, and I'm sure most of you would have pulled the legs off at some point. And they basically have the groin, and then the leg kind of clicks into the groin with a little knobbly bit. It's like that connection there is what the qua is referring to. How can the leg move around the groin without affecting the torso? It happens by the qua. So the qua is basically talking about the crease here, but really it refers to the whole joint all the way around, front and back. You can roughly separate the hip complex into four surfaces. We have the qua, which is like the deep hip, which would be the kind of inside surface here. We have the front of the hip here. We have the outside of the hip here, and we have the back of the hip with the glute and everything back there where the butt is. So the qua is really the inside surface of the hip, and of course it's at a bit of an angle compared to the other surfaces. It's kind of going down this way. Now, to work the qua, we're basically going to force it to isolate. So we have to move from this crease rather than anywhere else. And to do this, we want to be rather particular with the placement of both the foot and the knee. I have another video on my YouTube channel called Rolling Through the Midfoot. I really suggest you watch that before watching this video, and then come back here and keep watching if you haven't yet. But we're going to use a very similar action, or that exact action in fact, to understand the movement of the qua. First, you have the rolling through the midfoot action with no movement of the qua here at the moment, where I'm just rolling into the center of the foot as per the other video. And I just want to make sure that my thigh and my foot are going in the same corridor, in the same direction. So I'm not having my foot turned out while my thigh comes in like this. I really want them to both be in the same direction for the purpose of isolating the qua. Then what we want to start to learn how to do is turn around this crease as we roll onto the hip. So as we roll onto this hip, I'm going to turn my hips around this crease, and first I'm going to close the hip, like I'm bringing this hip around this way to close that crease, like that crease is folding closed. You'll see my thigh hasn't moved. I'm not swinging the thigh like this or moving my knee in any way inside or outside. So my thigh and my foot and my weight, in fact, will stay right over the center of the foot, and I'll just be able to close the qua around that kind of solid non-moving leg. So I really want to get this action of closing here without moving the leg. Then as I move back, I can open it, and this is a really nice drill to roll into the middle of the foot and close the front qua, and roll out of the middle of the foot and open the front qua. For the purpose of learning how to do it, you can just leave the back leg to do whatever it needs to do to facilitate the closing and the opening. You'll see often that I kind of come up onto my toes and things like this. You can learn to do this with both feet anchored in the ground. It works fine as well, but let's just concentrate on the front leg. Now, there are a few details here that I want to talk about before we go further, and that's how do we get this motion to happen without forcing anything, because when we force something, there are a lot of pressures moving through the knee, and we can damage our knee if we do it poorly. So we want to learn how to do it well, and we do that by using the release action. If you haven't watched my other videos, the action of release is essentially finding any muscle that's gripping tight and releasing it so it softens. Simple enough. If you take your fist that's very tight and you release your fist, the hand gets soft and loose. It's the same but applying to the leg muscles. Now if I'm over the center of my foot, actually being over the center of the foot or not doesn't matter too much, but it's better to work this loaded for a little while just to get the muscles involved properly, as opposed to doing it back here where I'm unloaded off the foot. So if I'm over the center of my foot and I close the quad here by bringing this back hip around, I've got the plane of the thigh here and it's like the back hip is moving this way like a clamp shutting. At one point, I'm going to run out of range of motion. And if I keep trying to shut the hip this way, you see this happens. That angle is no longer changing. The angle between the flat of my hip here and the plane of the front leg is no longer changing. It's frozen and I'm now pushing the whole complex out to the side. The knee goes out here and you'll see on my feet that the weight's now pushed to the outside of the foot. This is happening essentially because there's tension wrapping around here. So to solve this, I get to the point where that starts to happen and I want to put my mind in this area, feel for any tension that I have and release that tension so that the knee comes back to the center. And I don't want to close the hip any further than that limit, right? So I go as far as I can. As soon as I push a little bit, I stop, I release back to the center, which if it's done right will lengthen this tissue. So you'll feel a bit more of a stretch through here, but you'll also feel the knee move back to the center. This is on the closing side of things. So the moment you run into the end of the closing, you go like this. I want to release back to the center. It will close more. You'll see as I release, that angle between this part of my hip and this part of the leg gets smaller. And the same applies for if I open this hip away from the front leg here, opening the crease of the quad like that. At some point when it gets too open, I'm going to get the effect where the knee is dragged inwards like this. And that's because basically the angle here that was changing, it's opening, it's opening, it's opening. It doesn't open anymore and I keep moving the hip and it drags the knee along with it. This means that there's tension in the inside of the groin, in the quad itself, which I want to release. And so I can release, let that angle open up more like that. So we get an opening of that angle, let the knee come back to being in line with the corridor of the foot, which is very important. And I can keep going to the point where no matter what I do, I can't release any further and get the knee to go back, which means I've gone beyond my limit. So I need to come back a little bit. So as I close, it's going to want to push the knee to the outside and I want to release the knee back in line with the corridor. And as it opens, it's going to want to pull the knee to the inside and I release the groin until it's back in line with the corridor of the foot. This is the key for learning how to move through a free quad, at least as I approach it and explore it, and learning how to do these two actions, going to the end of the range of the motion, going a bit beyond and then releasing it back to the center, and same on the other end range of motion, here a little bit beyond and then release it back to the center. It's really, once you get familiar with this, you'll start to feel how to move around the quad bit by bit without interfering with the knee, without these tensions pulling on the knee this way and that way. This also works nicely when the leg is unloaded, particularly in things like the cat stance. You'll often find the knee gets dragged like this and you're going to need to release the inside of the quad to bring the knee back into alignment. And I just want to notice or point out there's a really poor way of doing this too. If I get to, let's say, the first position, I'm closing the quad like this. So this crease here is closing. The hip at the back is coming around the front. This angle here is getting smaller. And then I push past there. And then I've got some tension in the outer hip here that I would normally try and release. Instead of targeting that tension, I go into the groin and pull myself back. I now have tension here, battling tension here. And if I train myself to do that, it's just going to build more and more and more tension in my hip over time, and then I'm going to get more and more stagnant through the hip. So definitely do this by releasing the tension that's pulling the knee out of alignment until the knee goes back into alignment, and not by dragging against that tension. Same with this side. I don't want to use my outer hip here to pull the knee back to the center. I want to release the tension here and let the knee float back to center gently. If you can't release it yet, it just means you went way too far past your ROM. You can try with a smaller range of motion, doing it in a range where it actually works for you. And you want to keep building that up. Of course, do the other side in the same way. There are plenty of variations you can make of this drill. I talked about closing as you roll on and opening as you roll off. So closing the quad and opening the quad. You could also very easily reverse that. You also have all the same patterns going on with the back leg if you've kept the back leg anchored, and so on and so forth. I do have a course that goes into a lot of detail for this region. It's an 8-week course for awakening the qua, which works through lying exercises and standing exercises and so on and so forth. I'll link that in the description and the comments below, but this should really be enough working material for you to explore on your own as well. So I hope you find some use in this, and please write a comment if this has helped you, or if you have another approach to working with the qua that works really well as well. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to learn more or support my work, head on over to my website, craigmallet.com. You're also welcome to join my community, which can be found at community.craigmallet.com or via the menu on my main website. I generally have a number of services available. If you'd like some help, just reach out. I have a student program, I have online courses, I have workshops and private consultations, all available to any who would want it. As always, to appease the algorithm gods, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and/or share.